So this is little Button. He's my little nutter. Now he's outside. Now he's super antsy and mad at me, so thought I'd have him say hello. So we're down to a few lectures left. We're still in chapter 18. I'm still without makeup. And we're on lecture 2. So in lecture 1, we talked about hormones and protein-based water-soluble hormones versus lipid-based. The fact that lipid-based hormones can go right into the cell. There's nothing stop them. They don't, they just head right in. Protein-based water-soluble hormones bind to receptors on the outside of the cell. And so now we're about to talk about some more specifics. And the rest of this chapter is just marching through different glands, the hormones that they make. So you want to make yourself a table. Oh, now you want to be all nice. Look, now he's like, yeah, I'll be nice. All right, everybody, turn that way so everyone can say hi to you. Okay, I gotta go to work, but how's guts to work, my little friend? No, he's not really a cuddly kitty. Unless you have cantaloupe. If you have cantaloupe, he'll be right on you. Huh, my little friend? Huh? Yeah. Okay. Good, because I'm very easy to distract. This stuff's not that interesting. I'm trying to figure out how to make myself small. And, oh, there it is. It was buried in my plants. All right. So, I would like to get not to the dead person. Okay. So, with this picture here, we are in the brain. And, oops, nope, not yet, guys. I'm just trying to find myself here. Oh, son of a biscuit. Okay, so we're in the brain and we're talking about the hypothalamus. Remember that hypothalamus had this area here under, right, that spot. There's the thalamus, and we had the hypothalamus right in there. So, the hypothalamus is connected to, this whole thing is the pituitary. Big blob. I know it looks like something else. We're not going there. And it's connected by a stalk that's called the infundibulum. And when we look at the pituitary gland, that's this big blob hanging off of the infundibulum, the stalk. It actually has two very different regions. It has a front region, that's the anterior pituitary. And it has a back region, and that's the posterior pituitary. Oh, I guess, so this is, I'm trying to see, does it ever, oh, so this is labeled anterior pituitary, and then this back one is labeled posterior pituitary. Now, the hypothalamus isn't connected to the anterior pituitary. There has a little bloodstream associated with it. It's this portal system. So the hypothalamus communicates with the anterior pituitary via a bloodstream. So communicates with anterior pituitary via bloodstream. We're going to talk about that a little more in a minute. The hypothalamus is in direct contact with the posterior pituitary via neurons. So there are neurons, and I know it's on another slide and we'll get to that. Neurons from the hypothalamus go right into the posterior pituitary. Okay, so it's very different how the hypothalamus talks to the anterior pituitary versus how the hypothalamus talks to the posterior pituitary. So let's zip through some of these slides here. And then we'll talk about, so here's my anterior pituitary. My hypothalamus, my anterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus, because it's connected via bloodstream, communicates through the use of hormones. Through use of hormones. So the hypothalamus makes releasing factors and inhibiting factors. And that's how it controls the anterior pituitary, right? So it controls to control anterior pituitary. We're going to talk about what the anterior pituitary makes in a minute. I better not. Oh, well, that's already talking about it. All right, I'm going to zip ahead now for a second and just pull up the posterior pituitary, and then we'll come back and look at all of this. Okay, so here's my hypothalamus with the posterior pituitary, and there's these neurons that go right into the posterior pituitary. What? And actually, the posterior pituitary has a claim to fame that it makes hormones. It doesn't make hormones. The posterior pituitary stores hormones. It's just a closet. Let me just try to write this. Stores hormones that the hypothalamus makes. So on top of everything else the hypothalamus does, it makes hormones and then shuttles them into the posterior pituitary for storage. How crazy is that? All right, so let me go back. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to continue, and I'm going to talk about the posterior pituitary hormones first. So this is a cute little picture of the hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary, and it makes two hormones. The hypothalamus makes oxytocin, and it makes antidiuretic hormone. So when we're starting to talk about hormones, you want to know where it's made, why it's released, and what its effects are. So one, where made. What's the stimulus for release? Why released? So you should make yourself a table and put all this information in to help you prepare for the next exam. Where it's made, why it's released, what is its effects? What its effects are. I guess that should be enough. Where it's made, why it's released. Yeah, good enough. So, here you go. Oxytocin is released in response to the stretch placed on the cervix during childbirth. So when the baby's head, so oxytocin is actually our positive feedback hormone. I don't know why I started with this one, because it's easier. So oxytocin, when a woman is going into labor, the head of the baby, is there a picture here? Nope. All right, I'm going to go big again so we can walk through this mechanism. So the head of the baby is pushing on the uterine floor, right? The opening of the uterus, which is the cervix. That pressure is being detected, so that's the stimulus going up to the head. It's going to the hypothalamus. Oxytocin is being released in response to that stimulus. Oxytocin will go back and it will actually go to the smooth muscle of the uterus and cause it to contract. Now, what will that do? Will that make there be less pressure, or will that make there be more pressure? That will make there be more pressure. So more pressure being detected up to the hypothalamus. Posterior pituitary releases more oxytocin, more contractions, and it snowballs. It snowballs and it snowballs until eventually it stops. What made it stop? The stimulus was gone. The baby was delivered. So that's what a positive feedback mechanism does. And that's oxytocin is our only positive feedback one that we ever talk about. So it enhances contractions until the baby, which is the stimulus, is out. I'm going to just leave it at that, because if I try to write the word delivered, it'll take forever. Oxytocin is also released when breastfeeding and causes milk to just be ejected from the breast. Okay. The other hormone I have that is released from the posterior pituitary is called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Antidiuretic hormone is released when you have low blood pressure. So if you have low blood pressure, it's also released when you're dehydrated, because when you're dehydrated, your blood is concentrated. It's salty. And when it's concentrated, that is also stimulus for release. So ADH goes to the kidneys and it says, hey, kidneys, hold on to water. And when I hold on to water, hopefully it helps my blood pressure. It helps my blood become more dilute. We're going to do a lot of specifics with this in the spring because I love the kidney. So if I have an increase in blood volume, that will prevent ADH from being released. If I have a decrease in blood volume, so a decrease in blood volume will lead to a decrease in blood pressure, and I will release ADH. So something that you guys can play around with a little bit is that alcohol blocks release of ADH. So what does that mean for you crazies that like to drink your alcohol? It means you're going to dump a lot of water. You dump too much water. What does that mean for the next day? That means you have a headache and you're dehydrated. Your alcohol has made you dehydrated, in addition to screwing with your cerebellum and making you think you're awesome when you're not and you're stumbling. Okay, so here's my 2 hormones released from the posterior pituitary, made by the hypothalamus. You know what I'm trying to say, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. So the control, this is in its actions. Okay. Well, let's go back to the antidiuretic hormone. Let's go back to the anterior pituitary. Sorry, guys. I'm just as out of it as you are. Where am I? Anterior. Okay. So remember, sorry, it's a mess. The hypothalamus. So we just talked about the posterior pituitary. That's the guy in the back here, the guy on the left. We're going to talk about the guy on the right, the anterior pituitary. And the hypothalamus talks to the anterior pituitary via this blood system, the portal system, to control what's happening in the anterior pituitary. Oh my gosh. So here are 6 hormones. Which one is it not half? Oh, okay. Just not putting one on there. There's actually another hormone made. So the anterior pituitary makes all of these hormones. The growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and melanocyte stimulating hormone. And they don't really know what this one does. Oh, where does it have the little star? Oh, prolactin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7. So we're going to go into each of these hormones, talk about them a little bit, get my notes because I don't have them all committed to memory. I do, but I'm trying to talk a little more about growth hormone because that one's the one I'm picking on this year, I guess. So let's look at, I don't want this one. This is just saying, all right, so this is just showing you overall how the hypothalamus is talking to the anterior pituitary. So, and this was the cortisol. This is kind of the feedback loop that we were talking about. If I have low levels, and cortisol is a hormone made in the adrenal medulla, that will be detected in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will release its hormone, corticotropic releasing hormone, to the anterior pituitary, causing the anterior pituitary to release its hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. And that will go to the adrenal cortex. So remember the adrenal gland. It looks like that little triangle sitting on top of the kidney, and it has the outer region, which is the cortex, and the inner region, which was the medulla. Oh my goodness. So it goes to the adrenal cortex and says, hey, adrenal cortex, make cortisol. When cortisol is made, elevated levels turn off the anterior pituitary, elevated levels turn off the hypothalamus. So it's a negative feedback loop. The majority, all anterior pituitary actually, all anterior pituitary hormones are controlled via this. Act like this. Okay. So, human growth hormone is the greatest volume of the hormone made by the anterior pituitary. And this is interesting. It's released in bursts every few hours. And you know what I read that I didn't even realize is that it's released more during sleep. So glad my kids are good sleepers, and that's why they're like Jolly Green Giants, huge. So sleep is so important to these kids for growth, because growth hormone causes growth. And growth hormone is controlled by the hypothalamus via a releasing hormone and an inhibiting hormone. So this lovely picture, I love these loops. I love them, love them, love them. If you have hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, decreased levels of blood in low levels in your blood of fatty acids, or a lot of amino acids, you're in sympathetic nervous system, or you're in deep sleep, and then, or you have testosterone or the estrogens, that will actually stimulate the hypothalamus to release releasing factor, which will go to the anterior pituitary saying, hey, release growth hormone. Growth hormone goes to all over the whole body, including the liver, bone, skeletal muscle, and cartilage, and it will stimulate growth. Right? Oh, did you have a growth spurt overnight? Yes, yes, you did. Increases growth of bones, increases muscle mass, tells the liver to break down and dump more sugar into the blood. That's the liver aspect. And it's interesting. It tells the cells don't use that glucose. That's interesting. So, growth hormone is actually inhibited if you have high blood sugar, if you're obese, wonderful. If you have high levels of growth hormone or aging, okay, yeah, I'm not growing anymore. Decreased levels of amino acids, that will be detected by the hypothalamus, and it will put out its inhibiting hormone, and it will turn off growth hormone, right? So it turns it off. So that's interesting. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so human growth hormone goes all over the body. Oh, and this is probably what that whole table already said. Thyroid stimulating hormone, right, released by the anterior pituitary. Why? Why released? Because the hypothalamus said to. Said so. Thyroid stimulating hormone goes to the thyroid. Follicle stimulating hormone goes to the testes or ovaries. Luteinizing hormone also goes to the testes and ovaries. Prolactin goes to milk producing tissue in the breast. Oops. That's where you're making milk. Adrenocorticotropic hormone goes to the adrenal cortex. And we're just not quite sure what the deal is with melanocyte stimulating hormone. Oh, And here's our whole table. I guess I should have just clicked forward. Growth hormone goes to all of your body's cells. And this is interesting. It tells them don't use glucose. My dog is snoring. Jenny, you're killing me. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Oh, no. Goes to the thyroid gland. This is my target tissue. Follicle stimulating hormone goes to the ovaries and testes. In females, it stimulates follicles and estrogens. In males, it stimulates sperm production. Oh, I already says produce sperm. Luteinizing hormone also goes to my ovaries and testes. In females, it stimulates secretion of estrogen and progesterone, ovulation. In males, it stimulates the production of testosterone. Prolactin goes to mammary glands, milk-producing glands for milk production. Adrenocorticotropic hormone goes to the adrenal cortex for stimulation pretty much of just cortisol. Melanocyte stimulating hormone, exact role is unknown. Don't even say it might do this and it might do that. We don't know. Okay, and we talked about the posterior pituitary and the oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone. And there's a table about what they do. So let's stop there.